This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. As you likely know, it is Memory Palace week here at This Day. Our fellow Radiotopia host, Nate DiMeo, has been with us all week to talk about some of the stories in the new Memory Palace book, which is available for order now. So yes, a celebration of Nate's great new book of short historical stories, but also a celebration of Radiotopia as we kick off the Radiotopia fundraiser. Hint, hint, listeners, go support independent podcasting now. Thanks to all of you who have chipped in this fundraiser so far. But listen, today I thought we could do a little bit of a step back and look at the art of history storytelling, if that doesn't sound too pretentious. Nate is really, really good at it and does it very differently from the way we do it here on the show. The Memory Palace is beautifully written and scored with music. Ours is, of course, a chat show, a conversation show. But I know that all four of us think a lot about why history matters and how best to bring history to life. And so that is what we will talk about today. First, as always, hello to my co-hosts, brilliant history teachers and authors and communicators in their own right, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And yes, Nate DiMeo of the Memory Palace is here. Welcome back for a third and final time this week.
Delighted to be here.
I just have to say one thing before we get going about the Memory Palace itself. And Nate, I think I've told you this, but I often find that when you ask people, like, what is your favorite podcast? People like rattle off a few names and hear a bunch of different things. And people are like, oh yeah, I like this. I've been listening to this. So forth. If you encounter a Memory Palace fan, they will just like get dead silent, look you straight in the eyes and just be like, the Memory Palace. Like how in the world would there be any other answer other than the Memory Palace? And Nate, you
sweet.
are many people's favorite podcast. I think a lot of people will very sort of forcefully argue that you have made the greatest podcast of all time. And I really appreciate all the work you've done, and especially the way in which you kind of think about history. And so that's kind of what I want to
tell a story. You jacked me up. Like I was saying earlier, I was like, your podcast has messed me up because, like, I don't know, maybe I'm in my feelings or whatever, but I was listening to the story about how the telegram and Morse code was made.
Yes.
And the way you tell, you draw people in by telling them these stories, and you kind of do this plot twist that's like, wait, what? And then you know, I'm ruined. I'm completely ruined. Or you know, the story is like a larger story for an explanation for an invention or for a way of thinking or something like that. Like I was thinking about a story about, you know, better babies and how you're looking at these cute kids or imagining these cute babies, and then you're like, eugenics, and you're like, wait, what? It's so well produced. You are so enraptured so quickly in the storytelling.
I appreciate that very much, because that's basically what I'm going for. But like the telling of it in the trying to get people in their feelings really quickly, etc. Like that's sort of that's like at the origin of the thing. Like at one point, I was like, why on some level is a lot of history content so boring or so unengaging? And why, however, if like a friend who was just reading a history book, you know, like, why is their telling of the story so much more exciting than if I were often to have sat down and read the 400 pages? And it's because they have found meaning in it. It's because they have read the 400 pages and they want to share something with you that they have learned. And it's because the meaning they brought to it. And I was like, what if I could create a show that was all that? You know, like I'll never kind of forget like hanging out on a couch for way too many hours, like watching the Ken Burns documentary about Lewis and Clark, which is a subject, you know, that I went in not particularly interested in about. And on some level, I came out not particularly interested in. That I like, I'd like to know some stuff about the Louisiana Purchase. I'd like to know some stuff about early America. And learned a bunch of stuff. But sometime at about like hour 3.5 on the couch, I suddenly like sat up and was like, oh my God. Because I had learned all this stuff. And there is, there's the core of discovery, and they're traveling, looking for the Northwest Passage, and they're following the Missouri River, wondering if indeed this might be the Northwest Passage. And they've been through all these trials and tribulations, and it's a hard life, and you've gotten a good sense of how hard it was because you spent time with them, and they've trapped, and they've hunted, and they've suffered. And then they get to the end of the river, and it just runs out, and they're how does that? What a thing to have gone all this way. And you're like, oh, I wonder if there's a Northwest Passage. I wonder if the whole of human history is about to change. And it just doesn't, because there isn't one. And they've realized that. So on the one hand, mission accomplished. But on the other hand, they can turn back and they can cash in their money and they can be done with this trip and done with the hardship. And they can go back and get a cushy appointment in the government for having accomplished this. And they're staring at the Rocky Mountains or between them and the Pacific Ocean. And then there are miles and miles and more hardships to go. And they decide to keep going. And the keeping going, to me, is what that story is all about. And it's what I find beauty in. And so when I go to a bar and I sit with a friend and they're like, what did you do yesterday? And I said, well, I watched this documentary. That's the story I tell them. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what if I can do the work of finding the context and then figure out that root of figuring out how quickly can I tell you this story so that you're not bored? How quickly can I get to the feeling? How quickly can I share with you this thing, not just that I've learned, but this thing that I felt, this way that I was moved. And, and just realizing that there's a million different historical things out there. There's it is very easy to, particularly today, to find fun facts about history or historical content. They're in your feeds. They're pop up in articles of, written by other people who found them in their feeds or whatever. It's very easy to find history, but what turns an anecdote and turns a factoid or whatever into a story, is meaning. Mm-hmm. It might be immoral, but it is, finding is it is ordering history and ordering these things, both literally to make sure they're twists and turns, but really creating sense of it and creating meaning and finding the importance of it, but then explaining why that matters to me, and hopefully it will then matter to someone else. And often that is in the way that it connects with maybe it's in the way that it connects with the news, but more often it connects with just me trying to sort something out about my life. It's me trying to sort something about
it's
parenting.
The humanity in it.
Or whatever it turns out to be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought up the comparison with the fun fact about history, because I think that's something that we as historians are constantly trying to help people understand, that they often come to history as, oh, this is a set of facts about the past.
Right.
And we're like, no. It's a set of stories about the past. It's a set of arguments about the past. Yeah. And that is way more interesting than trying to learn history by rote. And in fact, I mean, while we all have, as historians, a lot of dates and facts stuffed in our heads, there's a lot that we cannot recall very quickly. And when you sit down with an enthusiast, Civil War historians in particular have this problem.
They're the worst.
And they quiz you on facts. And you're like, well, that's not really what I do.
Yeah, that's not really how we make sense of things. I find the same struggle in the classroom too, Nikki, where it's students will come to me and they'll be like, I hate history. And I'm like, you don't hate history. You love history. You just have not had the right teacher. But when they start to hear the stories of what feels like historical gossip, or when they are hearing stories that are either personal or detrimental, or when they get the moral of the story, kind of tell me why this matters, tell me how this has an impact on my life or how this resonates, then it's a whole new world that you can open up. And then you realize just how high the stakes are in telling those stories.
Right.
Because when you think about the Civil War, for example, because Civil War enthusiasts are the worst, but when you think about the war, it's not just about slavery versus states' rights. It's not just about, Gettysburg or the Emancipation Proclamation or these. It's about these much bigger consequences that we are still grappling with, that we have still not gotten our heads wrapped around, that, is with us. And I don't know how to emphasize that even more. I mean, when I think about the current political battles, it's like there's a reason people ban books. There's a reason curriculum and textbooks are being contested, because people know that these stakes, these stories, they do work. They do political work. They do social work. They shape the psyche. They shape our patriotism, you know?
And they're not fighting over the facts. They're not fighting over when
it's exactly,
the bomb
they're fighting
was
over
dropped.
meaning.
They're fighting over meaning.
Right.
Fighting over meaning. Yeah. And the feelings connected to those meanings.
Hey, it's Jody. I want to take a moment of your time. And I don't know if I've ever talked about where the idea for this show came from, but about 4 years ago, I left a full-time job to strike out on my own as an independent podcast producer. And the first thing on my wish list was to make a show with Radiotopia, because I knew it was the home for independent podcast creators, and some of my favorite audio makers in the world make their home here at Radiotopia. And in those 4 years, I, along with Nikki and Kelly and Jacob and Brittany and you, our listeners, have been able to make exactly the show we want to make. And I'm including you on that list because you are part of this too, not just because you listen and send us comments and ideas, but because some of you have also decided to become members of Radiotopia. And that step from listener to member supporter makes all the difference in the world. So yes, it is the Radiotopia fundraiser right now, and I'm here to try and ask you to take that step from listener to member. Media is in a very rocky place right now, as I'm sure you know. The world is, too, in a pretty rocky place. And in the same way that I hope this show can help us navigate the crazy state of the world right now, support from listeners helps us try and navigate the very choppy financial waters we face as well. Making this show over the last 4 years has been a real honor. We want to keep making it, and we can only do that because of Radiotopia members. If you want to become a member, now is the time. It is the Radiotopia Fall Fundraiser. We have a goal of reaching 2,024 donors. It is 2024. And we're asking you to visit radiotopia.fm/donate. Go to radiotopia.fm/donate. You can learn lots more about how your work will help support Radiotopia, see all the different shows that you will be backing. Once again, that's radiotopia.fm/donate. Every little bit helps. And on behalf of the whole team here, thank you for your ears and thank you for your support.
We want to tell you about another podcast from PRX called Monumental. This podcast explores questions about the past, present, and future of U.S. monuments, uncovering the stories about what and who is important, as well as the stories that have been left out. Join host Ashley Seaford across the country with their team of journalists. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
It is interesting because, you were saying what it means, what Civil War means. And I agree, but it's also what it means to you and what it means to us. But it is what it can mean to your students if told correctly and if told well. And, over and over again, what history kind of means is like this moment, this post-election moment, in the weeks after the election, et cetera, and will be going on for a long time, is it, there are articles all the time that say this is an end of an era, or they're you can, or this is not an end of an era, et cetera. And one of the things that brings me to history is truly trying to process my sense of the present. And it's not just in the way that let's look to the administration of Grover Cleveland to say what it can tell us about Donald Trump. To me, in some ways, I'm never, that often doesn't jive with me, despite how much I enjoy listening to the show. There's this thing about looking to the past that, I'm often does that match up? And you spend that time thinking about it. But I actually look to the past in part because my understanding of the present is just, I'm overwhelmed by this sense of that the present is constantly contested. That we think about the past as contested, because there are conflicting, understandings to this day of the Civil War, et cetera. But if you just think about how often, over the course of the next months, we will be reading things about why this election went down the way that it did. And the polyvariant opinions and the ways that those things will be weaponized or sincere or whatever. It's the memory that it's the sense that the complexity of our present is no different than the complexity of the past. That we are today narrativizing our present to make sense of it. We are narrativizing our own memories to give us consciousness and allow us to move through the day. That the act of storytelling is, we don't just tell stories to live, like we tell stories to like actually function, to cope. To cope and just to process information and understand how to work. And we do that in the most intimate ways in our consciousness. And history is that it is that next step. It is, and there's something very interesting because we don't watch history. We aren't too conscious, or we might be, of the way that our current history is being written, all the time, and the way that it's contested. But we are, and we can picture the way that it might go down in the future, and what things might be debated, and what thing might remain important to the future. In some ways, we won't be able to anticipate. But the thing that I love to keep alive in the Memory Palace is that I want it to feel like the present. And not just because I want the people to be relatable. I want it to feel as messy. I want it to feel as unclean and imprecise. I want details that are true, but also just kind of stick out as like, oh, there's something like that bumps up. Why is this making me feel a little bit strange? It's because we always walk around feeling a little bit strange. And I want to like make sure that when people look at the past, to find inspiration or find wonder or find horror or whatever reason they're doing, I just want them to remember that that it was just life, and it was messy, and it was confusing, and the people who are doing it are just like us, and they had anxiety, and they had mortgages, and they had all of the things that make and constrain our days. And in doing so, like in me, like going back to the past, if like that's part of like the political project is to always say, yeah, but it's more complicated than that. It's like a worthy project in its own right. But but the reason why I personally kind of keep doing it on some level is I just find it useful to remember that. Like I find it useful to like look at someone's life and remember that it ends, so that I can remember that I can be reminded of the short brevity of my own life. And there's just something, I just find it very powerful, like as a citizen and as like a parent and as like a spouse and as a son or whatever, to just remember and be conscious and be present with the present, to just remember just, how short lives are, but also how quickly change can happen and how difficult political change can be to make, but how it only gets done by everyone, not just working together, but everyone working separately, and, things just kind of pushing forward. And, so to live a little bit better in the present, like I am often find myself like connecting to the past to do that.
Yeah, there's so much that's good in there. And I think that idea of, the tidiness of history, as it's often told, is what gives it a sense of surreality or unreality, because you're just like, but life isn't like that. And being able to bring some of that nuance and messiness back does strike me as a way of making, one of the things that I often think about in teaching is that the hook for getting people interested in history is to make the familiar unfamiliar and to make the unfamiliar familiar. And making the unfamiliar familiar, that's what bringing all of that messiness and complexity and storylines that don't go anywhere, that's what that does, is it's like, oh, right, that's like life.
And you've hinted at it, but I think one of the things that you do most powerfully, and one of the things that, frankly, in this show and has clicked for me the most, is this simple act of understanding what it must be like for the actual people in the story, and how would you react? I mean, it seems like such a simple question, but it's just like actually try and put yourself in their shoes. And I mean, one of the moments that I like cherish from having done this show, it's a silly moment, but we did this episode about these guys who tried to dig up Abraham Lincoln's body and hold it ransom because have you done this on the show?
Speaking of dudes
no, I never have.
Yeah, it's dudes doing things. These guys who were like in trouble with like a tax collector or something, had this scheme to dig up Abe Lincoln's body and hold it ransom to then get sort of like their charges dismissed or whatever. And they do this, it goes totally sideways. But I had, as we were talking about that, I had this moment of like being like, what would it have been like to be like the fourth friend? Like 2-3 friends come up with the idea, and you're the fourth guy who they kind of rope in because you are hanging out, and all of a sudden You're just looking around. The cops are there. You're like hiding in the corner. Lincoln's body is like there. And you're like, what have I gotten myself into?
That is exactly like the thing that gets forgotten about the past is like, because they're the things that like don't make it into the letters. It's simple, but it's feeling, it's just that like, what did it feel like to be that guy? What did it feel like to be that woman is very rarely written down or written down accurately or written down, contemporaneously. And so when you find the obnoxious Civil War fan, et cetera, and when you read the detailed account of this battle or that battle, when it all comes down to it, the thing that's missing is the people who are on the battlefield thinking to themselves, what did I get myself into?
Yeah. Last thing I want to hear you talk about is a little bit the kind of process of going from audio to the written page. And obviously the Memory Palace is beautifully written. I've often said that one of the things I love about audio is it's kind of the best place to live in uncertainty. And I just think there's things you can do in a conversation through the tone of your voice, in the sort of nature of the medium, that you can kind of speculate and live in and we've talked about this a lot. You've talked about the sort of mistiness of history and the uncertainty and the complexity. When you write something down, I think something happens, right? It's all of a sudden static. It's on the page. People can crack it open now. They can crack it open 15 years from now. So did you kind of worry or have to rethink how you told the stories and the kind of like what happens when you're telling a story out loud to when you're actually placing it in type?
There's all sorts of like little writing things that like that, I could talk about in a writing podcast forever. But the truth of the matter is I was just exciting to see what happens because it is different. And, over the years, people would come to me from publishers and they'd say, hey, we really like the podcast. We really like your platform, et cetera. Like, what book do you want to write? And I'm like, this is what I want to write. This is what I do. Like, but what if you like wrote like a Seabiscuit or like The Devil in the White City or something like that, where you take a small, I'm like, I take a small thing and explains the world. Like it's not what I do. What I do is I just take the small things. Yeah. Like that's what I'm good at. It's what I have the patience for. It's like, so can we just do this? And it took a long time to find someone who did it. But what I really was excited to do was see what happens when you collect them. It's like there were these books when I was a kid, whether it was like these like Little Ripley's Believe It or Not paperbacks that somehow had ended up at our house, or like Where the Sidewalk Ends, that like I would just turn to out of boredom over the years, over and over again. And they felt like these little magical objects because within them were this like multitude of stories. Within them was like surprises and twists and turns. But also you would read the one that was a favorite and you'd pick it up again. Or you would read it as like 2 years later and you would suddenly get something you didn't get before. And the dream on some level was to create a book like that for adults, where there would be these stories that were kind of like, that would feel kind of fun and light and breezy, and you could read them on a plane ride or whatever. But then they would take you by surprise. And in the same way that like I look, through history until something like moves me and catches my eye, like the truth of the matter is like there were times when I would read my own book and I'd be like doing edits and I'd be like, I'm not even sure why this is in here. Why is this the one my editor's chosen? But then like the third time through, I'd be like, this is good. Like,
don't you love that?
Don't you love reading your own
stuff? And you be like, you did that, Kelly. You did that. Like,
yes, exactly right. And so like, yes. So over time, there's nothing better with the podcast where someone coming up to you like, oh, you know what my favorite episode is? And I'm like, I bet they're going to say that one that like lots of people like or whatever. And they'll say, it's this one. And I've forgotten I've done it.
Totally.
And for whatever reason, it has moved them. So the notion of being able to create a book with all of these different stories in there that people will be flipping through and suddenly this one will mean something to them on a particular day and they will take it with them. And then they will want it on their shelf and it will have that kind of power that one of those books did to me. That's the dream.
Yeah.
And that's why it makes a great gift this Christmas and holiday season.
There we go. Got the pitch in at the end.
You just scooped.
Available for pre-order now.
Hey, this is my job, is to do the show. Okay? You don't have to.
Well, I've been told by Random House that it's my job. So thank you, Dave.
But no, seriously, if you're looking for meaning and you're looking for history, which we all need right now, and if you're looking for a great Christmas gift, the Memory Palace will give you all of those things. The book is out now. It's The Memory Palace, True Short Stories of the Past. And of course, maybe for some of our listeners, we've introduced you to the Memory Palace expanded universe. What do they call it?
Yeah, it's the MPU, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah.
But there's obviously the podcast and years of the podcast for you to go listen to as well. But Nate, congratulations on the book. We're really honored to call you a Radiotopia compatriot, and thanks for
Oh my
doing
God,
this.
likewise. So great to spend this time with you.
Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to This Day in Esoteric Political History. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Our transcripts, which you can find on our website, are done by Kala Nakua. This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Audrey Martovich is executive producer. Yuri Lasordo is director of operations. If you want to support the show, tell a friend about This Day and become a member of Radiotopia at whatever level works for you. You can do that at our website, thisdaypod.com. Also on our site, you can find transcripts, sign up for our newsletter, find links to follow us on Instagram and Threads, buy merch like shirts and hats and phone cases, find information about our theme song, give feedback on an episode we've done, or suggest topics for a future episode. That and lots more, thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Abergan. We'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.